I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and then after you have spoken, I'll invite members of the committee to put questions to you. And for the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Viktoria Vibhakar, and I appear in the capacity of a former senior child protection worker with Save the Children Australia.
Thank you.
My name is Kirsty Diallo. I appear today as a former child protection and support worker working for Save the Children Australia.
Now we have 45 minutes set aside for your appearance here, and I'll share the time equally between the respective senators. If you do need to take something on notice, that's fine. And would either of you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, I would, Senator. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present evidence to this committee. The evidence that I provide to you today is in my capacity as a former senior child protection worker with Save the Children Australia. I was employed by Save the Children Australia in November 2013, and I resigned in September 2014. I'm currently a PhD scholar in the School of Medicine at the University of Queensland. My research area is the manifestation of post-traumatic stress disorder after exposure to psychological trauma. I am also a professional social worker accredited with the Australian Association of Social Workers. The professional assessments that I will offer today are based on over 20 years of professional social work experience. I have an advanced practice Master of Social Work degree and a postgraduate certificate in infant mental health. I've been licensed as a mental health professional in California since 1998. My clinical specialty is children in trauma and parent-child relationships. I'm bringing this evidence to you today because children and their parents cannot be here to tell you themselves about the harm that they have experienced while detained in Nauru. As a social worker, I have an important part of my ethical responsibility is to report child abuse, as well as to report inadequate institutional responses to abuse that leave children at continued risk of harm. While I was employed at the Nauru detention facility, children and their families experienced physical and sexual assault, as well as extensive mental harm as a result of their detainment. This harm could have been prevented. The Nauru RPC had inadequate child-safe policies, protocols, and training to prevent and respond to crimes against children and to protect children from mental harm. Even after children were identified at high risk for continued abuse and there was evidence of severe mental harm, Save the Children child protection workers were not allowed to remove children from these unsafe situations. Diana is a 16-year-old girl who experienced multiple episodes of sexual harassment over several weeks from several Commonwealth contracted employees. She reported her concerns and they were investigated by the Nauruan police. However, the sexual harassment continued. On one occasion, she and her friend were invited to a sexy party by adult male Commonwealth contracted employees. Diana was too afraid to walk around at night. This repeated sexual harassment triggered traumatic memories of previous sexual assaults she experienced in her home country. Due to the limited interventions available to keep her safe, her child protection worker advised her to spend as much time out of the Nauru detention camp as possible by attending school. Weekends in the detention facility were a particular time of fear for her because there was no escape possible through school from the Commonwealth contracted employees who were sexually harassing her and had attempted to kiss and hug her. It is notable that despite reporting police involvement in child protection intervention, Diana was subject to multiple incidents of sexual harassment. There was no option to remove her from this unsafe environment. In the case of Mia, she was sexually assaulted allegedly many times in the detention facility. At the age of 8, she was unwilling to discuss her sexual assault or to name her perpetrator. Although Mia had a father living in Australia able to care for her safely, she was detained for more than 7 months after disclosing sexual assault. She also experienced physical assault, neglect, and severe mental harm. She eventually planned to take her own life. Despite the risk to her physical and mental health, and that she may have been subject to ongoing sexual assault that she was too afraid to disclose, the Department of Immigration and Border Protection did not remove her until her caregiver attempted suicide, more than 7 months after her alleged sexual assault. Today, she remains detained in an Australian detention facility, separated from her father who lives in the Australian community. The children who have been assaulted and mentally harmed from detention in Nauru remain with no remedy or relief. The Australian Parliament is a place for the Government of Australia and the Commonwealth contracted organisations that allow children to remain in unsafe situations to be brought to account. I ask the Senate committee to exert their moral duty to provide remedy and relief for the children who have been assaulted and mentally harmed while detained in Nauru. I am asking for no more than what is appropriate and has been afforded to an Australian child who has been assaulted. I would like to speak in camera regarding an ongoing child protection issue in Nauru and provide evidence regarding that. I look forward to the committee's questions. Thank you.
Senator Adams, do you have a point of order?
I just want a clarification, if I could, Ms Vibhakar.
Yes.
You cited two cases. Were they cases, I just couldn't find it in the time, were they one from your public submission or the confidential submission?
They were both from the public submission,
Okay.
Senator.
And the names you used on the record, were they pseudonyms?
Yes, they are, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Ms.
Can I-
Diallo.
I'd like to make an opening statement. Thank you, Senator. I want to thank the Senate Committee for inviting me to this public hearing and for this opportunity to speak to the information contained in my submission. I'm happy to answer the Senate questions in relation to my public submission. I would, however, request that any questions pertaining to the confidential section of my submission be answered in camera to protect the identity of those named within. In addition to this, I respectfully request permission to provide a further statement in camera related to specific risks to children that remain in Nauru. I am here today in my professional capacity as a social worker and as a former child protection support worker with Save the Children Australia. I was employed in the Australian-funded Regional Processing Centre, Nauru, from October 2013 to January 2014. I have a Bachelor of Arts, Rural Social Welfare, a Bachelor of Social Work and a Master's in International and Community Development. I also have over 17 years of professional experience in community and social services, working both in Australia and the United Kingdom. In particular, I have a background in child protection, sexual assault, trauma and refugee and asylum seeker work. I wish to present testimony to the Senate regarding the ongoing significant risk of harm to children in both the RPC and the settlement camps in Nauru, the actual harm of children detained in the RPC or living in the Nauruan community as refugees, the lack of structures in place to prevent further harm to children, and the lack of appropriate infrastructure and services which would promote recovery from the trauma experienced in Nauru. I ask the Senate Committee to consider this information in light of the current Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse and the recommendations in the interim report published in 2014. In particular, the Royal Commission highlighted the need for transparency, scrutiny and accountability for institutions responsible for the care and provision of services to children. In Nauru, however, there appears to be a profound lack of public accountability and scrutiny regarding Australian government-funded services. As a result, there is a pervasive culture of secrecy which places children at risk of significant harm without consequence. I therefore welcome this inquiry and trust that the Senate Committee will take appropriate steps to address this lack of accountability. I also urge the Senate Committee to consider the rights of these children to be protected from psychological, physical and sexual harm and the need for Australian government-funded services and facilities to prioritise the rights and needs of all children. Following this hearing, I look forward to the Senate Committee taking urgent action to ensure that no further harm is experienced by refugee and asylum seeker children in the Australian government-funded services and facilities in Nauru. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, who wants to start the questioning? Senator Carr.
Yes, Mr. Diallo, do you seek a in-camera session today?
I do, Senator. It would be a brief section.
That's
I
right.
have
I
a statement
understand.
prepared.
That's fine. Well, we'll need to deal with that.
Would you like to deal with that first?
I could do that first.
Okay, well, if that's the wish of the committee.
It's up to you. Do you want, no, are there matters you... Look, can I make another suggestion, Mr. Chairman? I do think the witnesses should be given a chance to answer some of these questions, but if there are And then we should go back into camera. They haven't actually had a chance to.
So we can address the public submissions and questions pertaining to that, and then go into in camera later in the hearing, if that's your wish.
It's really up to the Senate
Yes, I know, but
committee. I'm happy for you to choose.
Because there are some questions here I want to
Okay.
deal with.
Or perhaps we'll proceed on the basis that the published submissions will be the subject of questioning.
Okay.
Senator Carr.
Look, could I ask you, in regard to the statements that have been made, that in December 2013, you said an incident involving sexual assault had been brought to the attention of the Minister.
On the 16th of November 2013, a child was sexually assaulted by a government contractor. That information was investigated by Wilson Security and an incident report was completed. That was forwarded on to the Department of Immigration. And in December 2013, I asked the Save the Children director, if that incident report had been forwarded on to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. I was advised that the Minister had seen that incident report.
So the reference that you have here on page 91 of your submission, where it says that the Minister was aware in November 2013, relates to that conversation you had with management of the child, of the Save the Children Fund, was it?
That's correct. That's based on the information that I
So-
received from the Save the Children manager.
You have no other information other than the statements that were made by the management?
No.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify something, Senator?
Yeah.
That you are confident that the department itself was aware because the incident report had been lodged?
As far as I'm aware, they should have been informed because that's protocol that had been established in the Regional Processing Centre.
Yeah.
But it's your contention that, irrespective of who actually saw the incident report, no forensic sexual assault services was established to respond to the instance of sexual assault, and security staff as well as local police received no additional training in regards to the interview of sexual assault victims. You're saying there was a systematic failure.
That's correct. And in addition to that, I was responsible for doing an assessment, a psychosocial assessment of the child after he'd been assaulted and of his mother. I had to carry out that assessment in an open space under a tree in the camp because there was no private facilities to have that conversation with that child. And that would be completely inappropriate in Australia. I've done many assessments of sexual assault survivors following an assault, and I've never had to do something like that in public.
Can I ask you, and we'll deal with that in detail in the in-camera session, could I ask both of you to advise the committee as, in your view, what were the conditions on Nauru like compared to other detention facilities that you're aware of?
I've actually visited detention centres in Australia. I've visited the Brisbane Detention Centre, Transit Centre, and they're starkly different to the conditions that are in mainland Australian detention centres. For a start, there's no walls and no solid structures available for families to reside in. When I worked in the detention centre, there were no beds. There's no cooking facilities for families as there are in other Australian-run detention centres. There's no child protection legislation that would protect children from harm. There's no specialist police that could investigate allegations of child sexual abuse that would occur in Australian detention centres. Yeah.
You said there were no beds.
When I worked in the detention centre in Nauru, there were no beds. They were on camp cots.
Okay. It's not a bed. Thank you.
Ms Vikabah, do you have anything to add?
I'd like to affirm what Ms Diallo indicated in reference to the lack of child protection legislation. Children in Australia have the protection of the courts and of child protection legislation that allows perpetrators to be brought to justice, as well as allows child protection professionals to assess children, assess their risks of harm, and remove them from harmful situations. This was not an option that was available in the Nauru detention facility. Children were left in situations of ongoing harm. They suffered ongoing additional assaults and were exposed to additional episodes of violence because of the inability of child protection professionals. We weren't allowed to remove them, even if we determined that their situation was unsafe.
So to be very clear, that the situation regarding these allegations would have been governed by Nauruan law, and there is no Nauruan law in terms of child protection as we know it.
Exactly, Senator.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, in regard to the living conditions on Nauru, and by which I mean both the physical conditions and the culture of the camp, do you think there is any correlation between those conditions and the incidence of sexual assault and self-harm and violence?
Well, one of the difficult things in the Nauru detention facility is that people are held in extremely crowded conditions, and they lack privacy, and they have accommodation that cannot be locked. So parents are unable to keep intruders or people who would seek to do harm or sexually assault children from entering their accommodation, whether it be at nighttime or during the daytime, and that includes both Commonwealth contracted providers as well as anyone else in the detention facility. There have also been ongoing sexual harassment issues, as I had talked about the young girl Diana, who was unable to walk around the facility at night because she didn't feel safe, because she had ongoing sexual harassment from adult Commonwealth contracted employees. So in that situation, I think that lack of privacy, I think the dense place, the inability to leave unsafe situations all contributes and places children at higher risk for sexual and physical assault.
And I would just like to add to that, if it's possible, Senator, that I would agree as a former sexual assault worker that there was a profound lack of protective structures in place for children. The fact is that families and children were locked in and remain locked into that facility. They can't leave. So if there is a perpetrator in the camp, they can't get away from them. It doesn't matter what they do, they cannot escape them. Parents aren't able to act protectively in that environment, and there's no working with children checks done of the employees that are from Nauru.
Vikar, you say that in page 10, it appears that workplace culture prevents the DIBP employees from acting to protect children and adult asylum seekers in Nauru, RPC from harm, and as a result of the lack of timely response to children in unsafe situations, children experience additional incidents of abuse and were exposed to multiple incidents of violence. Can you explain what you meant by workplace culture within the DIBP, I presume within the department, that you believe prevents staff from acting in the best interest of children?
Yes, certainly, Senator. So the Department of Immigration and Border Protection employees that I interfaced with and that were on Nauru, they made it clear that their primary responsibility was to ensure that the government policy was implemented. And what that meant was, even though on numerous occasions they were always aware of assaults that had occurred to children, the children remained in situations of ongoing harm. All that we were allowed to do was try to put in as much limited support as possible within the detention facility in Nauru. As you can imagine, was quite limited. So that is why you have a child protection worker who has to recommend to a teenage girl that she spend as much time away from the detention facility as possible in the school in order to avoid being the target of continued sexual harassment. This would not be a situation that would be considered appropriate or adequate to respond to sexual harassment. And such a high risk of sexual assault for a young adolescent female.
Now, you say on page 11, these emails demonstrate that the department was aware, that is DIVP, was aware of this substantiated sexual assault no later than the 19th of November 2013, almost 1 year prior to when the government claimed they first became aware of the allegation of sexual assault in Nauru. Now, who within the department was aware of the sexual assault allegation in November 2013?
So this, for my public submission, the names of the employees were redacted. So would you like me to state them in camera?
I'd like to know in the department. So you've
Sure.
actually, you'll put a proposition to this committee that officials knew about these incidents a year before they're publicly claimed. I think
Yes.
you're now in a position to, are you in a position to tell us who it was that knew about these events a year before it's publicly claimed?
Yes, I was. So Jane Bloomfield was from the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, was CC'd into the email, and she actually responded to the email regarding the sexual assault of the boy who is called Danny in my submission.
Thank you. Why did you leave, you've both said you've resigned from your positions. So can you give us an explanation as to why you resigned?
I was compromised ethically from being able to carry out my role as a senior child protection and support worker.
And for myself, it's the same thing. I felt that I was being compromised in terms of my professional ethics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Carr. If we go to Senator Reynolds and then Senator Hanson-Young, but we really are on a tight timetable, so we need to conclude this session at 2:30.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will be brief. I've only got a few questions, and thank you both for your testimony today. Ms Diallo, I just wondered if you could, or perhaps either of you, are either of you aware of the Moss Review?
I am.
Yes, I am, Senator.
Did either of you make submissions to the Moss Review?
My understanding of the Moss Review is that that was an invitation only. I wasn't invited to make a submission.
Okay. My understanding was they did accept unsolicited submissions, but so that the answer would be no, you didn't?
No, I didn't.
Okay, and how about you, Ms?
I was not invited to make a submission, and in fact, I was the only one of the 10 individuals who were ordered to be deported by former Immigration Minister Morrison, who was not contacted for an interview.
Yeah. So the answer is no, you didn't make a submission.
The answer is I was not invited to make a submission.
You were not invited to make a submission, and you didn't make a submission.
Right.
Off your own bat.
That's correct. I didn't make a submission because I was not invited. Yes.
Okay. So have you read the Moss Review?
Yes, I have, Senator.
So you've read the report, and do you have any comments about the recommendations?
Actually, thank you for giving me the opportunity to make comments about the Moss Review. I appreciate the spirit and many of the things that were indicated in the Moss Review and many of the recommendations. However, one of the key mechanisms that child protection professionals have to ensure the safety of children that is available in Australia and has still not been addressed and is still not available in Nauru is the ability to remove children from unsafe situations when professionals that are trained to assess the risk to children determine that the situation is unsafe. None of the recommendations in the Moss Review and none of the current framework in the Nauru detention facility allows child protection professionals to remove children from harm when they believe they're at risk of additional harm.
Okay, so coming back to my actual question, have you've read all the recommendations?
Yes, I have, Senator.
Okay. And so are there any of them that you don't agree? I mean, do you agree with the recommendations?
As I indicated, Senator, I think
not the ones
that
not the gap, but just in terms of the recommendations themselves. are you supportive of them? Is there any of them that you don't agree with?
You know, Senator, that's a lot of detail, and I'd like to take that question on notice to give you a full picture. I'd like to reread the recommendations in detail.
No, that's fair enough. So from your reading of the Moss, and clearly I'm sure you both would have read with the interest that you've got in these issues, would have read it closely. So on the top of your mind, there's one issue in terms of removal from harm that top of mind is the issue that hasn't been addressed in the Moss review. But on the top of mind, everything else has, but you'll come back to confirm that.
I don't believe I said that everything else has been addressed. What I indicated was this was a key issue
The key one, okay.
that still had not been addressed, and that is a significant concern in terms of child safety, because children have been sexually assaulted, they've been physically assaulted, and even after those initial assaults were reported, some of them were subjected to further assaults.
Okay.
So that is a key as a child protection.
But you will come back and then let us know if there's anything you think that the Moss review has missed apart from that particular issue. But I'm happy for you to take that on notice.
I'd be happy to, Senator. Thank you.
In addition,
Ms.
in
Diallo.
addition to that, I guess the comment that I would like to make is that I felt as a former sexual assault worker that there was a gap in terms of recommending that forensic sexual assault services and counselling services be established in Nauru. What we do know is that there has been a number of victims of sexual assault, but they haven't been provided those services because they don't exist in Nauru.
Okay. So you've read the report?
I've read the report.
And do you have any comments?
Sorry, can I just get a clarification on that? So that is in respect to the Nauru Police Force? They haven't got the wherewithal to investigate?
So the process in Australia is if someone reports a sexual assault is initially they would be taken to a hospital usually, and there would be a forensic examination offered. When they arrived at the hospital, they would meet with a qualified social worker or psychologist who would provide assistance and support and counselling, crisis counselling in relation to the event of the assault. Then a specialist unit that would investigate sexual assaults would be called in if they wanted to follow through with a forensic examination. So that's just not available in Nauru. Following that, most victims would be offered ongoing sexual assault counselling. Again, that's not available in Nauru.
Okay, thank you.
So after reading the Moss review, Ms. Diallo, do you agree with the recommendations? I mean, any of the recommendations you don't agree with?
I would need to take that question on notice as well, Senator, because there's a lot of recommendations and I want to make sure that I'm...
But you've got one, again, you've got one, you know, like Ms. Vikbar, you've got one issue sort of top of mind, and that was one you've just told us about.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in relation to both of your submissions, both private and confidential, obviously we don't want you to talk about the confidential ones, but you do raise a lot of very serious allegations. Now, neither of you did, as you've said, you weren't invited and you proactively didn't put submissions on these issues to the Moss review. So one of the challenging things for me, particularly as a committee member, has been reading these allegations and knowing that there's ongoing investigations now in Nauru with the assistance of the AFP, and I've got no way of knowing whether the allegations that you've raised with the Senate, as you know, we don't have any authority to deal with those particular allegations. So I'm presuming that if you didn't raise those allegations with the Moss review, that you've made sure that each and every one of these allegations has been referred through for investigation, that they're not just sitting here in this Senate report uninvestigated anywhere else, because that would trouble me deeply.
Senator, the information contained in my submissions was documented in incident reports that were forwarded on to the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, and that's evidenced by the email trail that shows that Department of Immigration and Border Protection were aware of those incidents. So I would presume that they would refer that to the AFP for investigation.
Okay. So as far as you know, so at the moment you've raised with us incidents, you've raised with us a number of allegations about incidents. So you're confident that all of these allegations that you've raised in both of your submissions have actually been reported through the appropriate chain to the authorities for investigation?
I'm not confident that procedures were followed by all staff in the Regional Processing Centre. In particular, I have noted, and I will speak in camera to this, that there were incidents of physical assault of children, that the incident reports were not written up by Wilson Security, and that's something that I followed up, but they weren't written up.
Okay. But, so the incidents you've raised here are all ones that, and now I'll obviously pursue this with the department, but everything that you have raised with us here was officially recorded, and incidents that were recorded for follow-up. So the issue is you're not sure which stage of investigation these allegations are up to, obviously, because you're obviously not with the organisations anymore. So is that correct? Everything you've raised here, you believe, has been recorded for further investigation?
Or I have requested that it be referred for further investigation.
Okay.
Senator,
And-
if I can add to that. So many of the incidents that I have raised have been reported through official channels, meaning incident reports, which is what we use in the Nauru detention facility. And as far as I know, they've been documented. However, since these incidents have been raised in my submission, I'm aware that Transfield, Wilson's and Save the Children has responded indicating that they don't have records of some of those incidents. And of course that causes me concern. And so I think in terms of whether or not the people involved appropriately followed investigative processes, I cannot say that I'm confident in that. I would have assumed that having incident reports documented and having, as a former senior child protection worker at Save the Children, I was privy to case conferences where children who had been assaulted, where their cases were presented, and I would have assumed they went through appropriate protocols and processes. However, one of the key aspects of my public submission is that those processes and investigation procedures were actually inadequate and were not thorough enough to prevent further harm.
I understand from the
Yes.
for the responses that we got in relation to that, which have now, I think, been published, in relation to those, is that what they said is that some of them, they were provided enough information to identify the cases that were being referred to, but others, there was not sufficient information provided to actually allow them to make even comment on them. So my understanding was they didn't say they weren't aware of individual cases, they just weren't provided enough information to be able to identify what case it was referring to.
I don't know how to respond to that question. I've provided the Senate with incident reports, case notes and meeting minutes, as well as email trails, and so which have obviously not been made public.
But hence the problem with having confidential submissions versus public submissions. The witness said that she didn't know why, and I'm just saying that...
Opportunity in the
in
in-camera
those
session to explain what she means. No?
Well,
Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. There's a number of cases that you cite in your submission, Mrs. Vibhakar, and I must say, just looking through it, there's definitely more than just a couple of incidents of sexual assault and abuse of children and young women in your submission. You reference a 4-year-old girl, you reference an 8-year-old girl, you reference a 2-year-old boy, you reference a single mother who was reported to be harassed by guards in her tent at night and expecting sexual favours. The list goes on. You are confident that each of these cases that you have referenced in your submission, there have been logged incident reports pertaining to?
Yes, except for there was, I believe, one case, which was the case of Sam, where Save the Children responded that they had no record of an incident report. So I know that Save the Children has had some data loss. However, I don't know if, I can't be sure that it was reported.
Can I ask you, the incident related to the 4-year-old girl, you put here exhibiting behaviour consistent with sexual abuse. The department was aware of this but did not remove her from detention, page 1314, my understanding of your report. Were you directly aware of that young girl?
Yes, I was, Senator.
How did you become aware of that situation?
So we had weekly staff meetings where we discussed cases, and we also had weekly what we called at the time vulnerable minor meetings, where we discussed children at particular high risk and particularly vulnerable. And that was a collaborative meeting between Save the Children personnel. And so I was aware of her situation through those forums. I also had conversations with her assigned child protection worker, and I was also aware of her and saw her many times when I was in the detention facility.
Mm-hmm. And in those meetings, the vulnerable, what did you refer to it as?
Vulnerable minor meeting minutes.
Vulnerable minor meetings, were they only Save the Children staff involved in those meetings?
Yes. However, it was my understanding that those meeting minutes were forwarded to Melbourne every week, and that I was informed by the Save the Children contract manager at the time that they were actually, another report was made to Canberra for advocacy with the Department of Immigration and Border Protection based on those meeting minutes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, and sorry, if I can add, Senator, I believe as part of my evidence, I submitted one of those reports that were forwarded to Canberra, specifically based on the vulnerable minor meeting minutes.
Yes, thank you. In relation to the 8-year-old girl whose father was living in Australia, who was willing and able to care for her, but she was sent to Nauru with a caregiver. You've said here that she was on Nauru for 7 months before being medically evacuated with her caregiver after attempted suicide. You're saying that this 8-year-old girl attempted suicide?
No, I apologise if I wasn't clear in my submission. It was the caregiver that attempted suicide.
Okay, thank you. Could you expand on this? There is also another 8-year-old child that you've referenced who was sexually assaulted, and that it was witnessed by a Commonwealth contracted employee.
Yes, that was... can you just...
Page 21. Case example 10. February 2014, an incident report was filed alleging the following: an 8-year-old boy was sexually assaulted by 2 male asylum seekers, and this assault was witnessed by a Commonwealth contracted employee. What contractor was that?
I believe it was a Transfield contractor, but I cannot be positive. It was either Wilson's or Transfield. Okay. I could check my professional records if you would like.
If you could, that would be good.
Okay.
And you're saying that this wasn't investigated or prosecuted, and that the reason given was that there wasn't enough written information in terms of the report.
Right. So in the prosecutor's statement from Nauru, the prosecutor stated that because of the lack of written policies and protocols on how to deal with these types of incidents of sexual assault, that it could be seen as it would make it more difficult to prosecute the case of a young boy. And he also indicated that the young boy could possibly become scared or have difficulty being able to testify.
Okay. On April the 22nd, 2014, you say on page 21 of your report, case example 13, an incident report was filed that alleged a number of Commonwealth contracted security guards were routinely sexually harassing young girls in the camp, most notably near the children's playground at night time. You've put here, and they had, prior to the filing of this report, had recently invited them to a, quote, sexy party. These young girls had repeatedly reported that sexual harassment. How were you aware of that incident report?
So I'm aware of that incident report through my capacity as a former senior child protection worker. It was not my client. However, again, she was someone that was discussed in vulnerable minor meeting minutes as well as in case meetings and in meetings with her caseworker.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Hanson-Young, can I just ask you to pause there for a moment?
Yes.
We are, taking very valuable evidence, and I'm not willing to constrain that. So, with the agreement of the committee, we might advise the department that we'll see them at 3:30 and continue on until 5:30.
Yes, that's fine.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Well, I think we're all right. Well, thank you. We'll continue on.
Thank you. In relation to, you put here a single mother on the 23rd of November 2014, reported to have men approaching her in her tent expecting sexual favours. Could you expand on that incident for me, please?
Yes, so this was a young woman who I was directly the child protection worker for at that time. She felt very unsafe. She had a very high needs, special needs child, and she often would need help in, helping to manage his behaviour or with parenting, and she began feeling extremely unsafe because she felt that that people that had provided her assistance in the daytime, and these were both Commonwealth contracted employees and adult asylum seekers, were then approaching her tent at night time or wanting sexual favours from her, and she felt continually unsafe. It's also important to note that this was also the mother of the child of the boy who was found hiding behind a garbage bin, I believe, that I noted in my submission, without any underwear. And so there were ongoing issues of safety, and she also did not feel safe to identify the perpetrators, and she refused to do so.
Okay. And all of that being your client, you wrote and filed incident reports about this?
Yes, I did write an incident report, and I also liaised with the Salvation Army, who was responsible for accommodation at the time, to have her moved to a safer place. But as you can imagine, in a place where there's common meal facilities, common recreational facilities, and where the toileting is very close to where males wander, it was never fully resolved for her. She continued to feel unsafe.
Some of the general accusations and allegations documented in the Moss review, of course, came from reports that became public around women being encouraged to trade, for lack of a better word, sexual favours to access amenities, showers, or longer time in the showers, for example, or access to facilities for their children. Are those general allegations surprising to you, or have you seen that yourself?
They're not surprising to me, but I was not directly aware of those. I do recall, however, an email in reference to, I believe it was a young girl who made these similar allegations in December 2013 to her caseworker, saying that she noticed that there was a lot of Commonwealth contracted employees around a particular area with a particular group of women, and that there tended to be some people had more material things than others, and she felt that it was related. And I know that that was forwarded on to Wilson Security in December 2013. And I'm more than happy to provide, to look at my professional records for further information, if that would be helpful to the committee.
Ms Vibhakar, when the Minister ordered Save the Children workers to be removed from the island, were you on the island at the time, or had you already left?
I had already resigned.
Okay, so you were there was 9 who were currently employed, and there was 1 who was remaining, and that was you who'd already resigned.
Yes, Senator.
Were you shocked by the announcement of that deportation notice by the Minister?
Yes, I was. I was, Senator. It was very distressing, because I knew at that time that even though I just resigned, it was a particularly high-risk time for children and families there. There were ongoing protests. There were multiple incidents of self-harm. There was, multiple allegations of sexual assault, and it was at a time when the child protection professionals that were on the island were in particular needed, and that really, is my understanding, compromised their ability to really manage and provide as much support to the people there, because effectively they lost several of their staff when children were at extremely high risk.
Did you ever have a situation where you filed, and this is to either of you, filed incident reports, or in the conversations in the vulnerable minor meetings that you would have, it was suggested that a particular child should be removed from the facility for their safety, and that request was ignored?
I was aware of several different cases where we, as child protection staff at Save the Children, were wanting the removal of children or families because they were in unsafe situations, and sometimes it did not happen, or sometimes it happened many months later. Like in the case of Mia, it happened 7 months after her alleged sexual assault, and it was after her caregiver's mental health had deteriorated to the point where she attempted suicide.
So this
Senator
is
Hanson-Young, we will need to go to in camera, so
Sure,
if you
can I just clarify just the end of this question? That 8-year-old child was, there was notes filed that she was sexually assaulted, but it wasn't for 7 months until she was removed, and even then it was because her caregiver was in trouble, not because the child was at risk.
And that's correct, Senator.
Thank you.
Or if I could just clarify, the timing that happened was after her caregiver had been sexually assaulted. Her caregiver had attempted suicide. I don't know, I can't speak to what motivated the department to remove her.
Thank you. But she was there for 7 months after an incident had been reported that she'd been sexually assaulted.
Yes. Yes, Senator.
Okay. Just before we proceed to in camera, Senator Reynolds, do you have a question or notice? Or?
I do. Given deference to time, one of the questions I asked, we didn't, before the Chair moved on to somebody else, I didn't get a chance to get an answer from you. In relation to your testimony about the individual cases, my concern is I want to make sure that every specific... there's a number of general allegations and there's a number of specific allegations. And it is very difficult for the committee at this stage to determine which ones have been referred to the police and are now subject to investigations and which ones are not. And in light of that, I think it would be a travesty if you've raised issues that haven't been put to the Moss Review or to the police, and they don't just sit here in this report. So if I could ask you to happy for you to take on notice, but any of the general allegations you've made about the types of activities you allege to have occurred, if you can review the Moss report and advise if all of those general circumstances have been raised by the Moss Review and will get picked up in the actions that are occurring as a result of the recommendations, or if you think that there are some specific areas of allegation that have not yet been actioned that you've raised. And the second one relates to the specific allegations. You've made some very specific allegations, some of which the people the allegations have been made against have been able to respond because they've told us that they can work out what case it relates to. But others, that they said they haven't been able to. So obviously you've got the knowledge of the specific cases that you're referring to. If you could take on notice and get back to us any ones that you believe may not have been properly reported through the process, through the incident report process, either to the department, because we can get they've got an access to all of those, or to the police, because I think it would be behoven on this committee to refer any ones we believe have not yet been referred to the police. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible from the way that we've got the testimony and the evidence at the moment, I think, for us to make that judgment. So would you be happy to take those two on notice and come back to us and let us know if there's anything you think you'd like the committee to refer on because you didn't report it to the Moss Review or to the police, or the individuals didn't either?
Okay. Yes, I'm more than happy to take that on notice, Senator, and I thank you for your interest in ensuring that children are safe.
Well, absolutely. I think that's what everybody wants, and if it would be a travesty, I think, and if through some of these recommendations that they just sit here in these reviews because we can't tell what's been referred forward and what hasn't. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Now the committee has agreed to a request to hear evidence in camera. So the committee has agreed to hear your evidence confidentially. However, you should be aware that the committee